The Force binds all things across the galaxy, connecting every living being in an invisible web of energy that flows through stars, planets, and the void between them. It is the foundation of reality itself in this universe, immutable, eternal, balanced between light and dark. But what happens when something from beyond all universes arrives, a being whose very existence defies the natural order, whose power stems not from the Force but from a reality where omnipotence is merely a starting point? The tear in spacetime appeared without warning above Coruscant's upper atmosphere. It wasn't a hyperspace anomaly. It wasn't a wormhole. It was something far worse, a wound in the fabric of existence itself, bleeding iridescent energy that sensors couldn't classify and scanners couldn't comprehend. The rift pulsed with colors that shouldn't exist, casting the planet-wide city in strobing illumination that made billions of citizens look skyward in confused terror. In the Imperial Palace, Emperor Palpatine's meditation shattered like glass. The ancient Sith Lord's yellow eyes snapped open, his withered face contorting with an expression that rarely crossed his features, uncertainty. Through the Force, he felt something that shouldn't be possible, a presence that existed outside the cosmic flow, a consciousness so vast and alien that the Force itself seemed to recoil from contact with it. It was as if reality had developed a tumor, and that tumor was aware, curious, and utterly beyond his comprehension. Master? Darth Vader's respirator punctuated his question as he entered the throne room, his imposing figure silhouetted against the viewport that showed Coruscant's panicking skyline. I sense. Silence. Palpatine rose from his throne, moving to the window with surprising speed for one who usually cultivated the appearance of frailty. His gnarled fingers pressed against the transparent steel as he extended his consciousness toward the rift. What he found made even his ancient, corrupted soul hesitate. Something has come. Something that should not exist in our reality. The rift expanded, and from its center, a figure emerged, humanoid in shape but clearly not human, not in any way that mattered. His form seemed to shift between states of matter and energy, sometimes solid, sometimes translucent, as if his physical body was merely a suggestion rather than a fixed reality. He wore what appeared to be a simple white garment that flowed like liquid light, and his face, if it could be called that, held features that were almost perfectly symmetrical, almost human, but wrong in ways that made the eye slide away from direct observation. The Beyonder, for that was the only name this entity had ever claimed, descended through Coruscant's atmosphere with the casual indifference of a god stepping off a cloud. Starfighters scrambled to intercept, TIE fighters screaming through the sky in perfect formation, their twin ion engines shrieking as they opened fire. Emerald laser fire converged on the descending figure from 12 different vectors, enough firepower to vaporize a capital ship. The bolt stopped 3 meters from the Beyonder's form, hanging suspended in the air like insects trapped in amber. He cocked his head, examining the frozen energy with the curiosity of a child discovering fireflies for the first time. Fascinating, his voice echoed across all frequencies simultaneously, broadcasting through every comm channel on the planet. You defend yourselves with light converted to coherent energy. Primitive, but creative within your limitations. With a gesture that seemed almost apologetic, the Beyonder reversed the energy's trajectory. The laser bolts shot back toward their sources, but rather than destroying the TIE fighters, they simply phased through the craft harmlessly. There, the entity continued, his voice carrying an undertone of genuine pleasure. I've modified their fundamental interaction properties. They can no longer harm your vessels. You're welcome. The TIE pilots, confused and terrified, broke formation and retreated toward the nearest Imperial garrison. Ground-based defense batteries swiveled toward the Beyonder, but the order to fire never came. Deep in the Imperial Palace's command center, Admiral Thrawn, one of the few non-humans in the Imperial hierarchy, stared at the sensor readings with his characteristic calm, his glowing red eyes narrowing in calculation. Hold all fire, Thrawn commanded, his accented basic cutting through the chaos of the command deck. That entity just demonstrated it can manipulate energy at a quantum level with casual ease. Further aggression will only provide it with more data about our capabilities. He turned to his subordinate. Inform the Emperor we are standing down. This is not a threat we can eliminate through conventional means. The Beyonder continued his descent, drifting through the canyons of Durasteel and permacrete that made up Coruscant's endless cityscape. He observed everything with the fascinated attention of a scientist examining a new species. Speeders veered away from his path. Citizens fled into buildings. Stormtroopers established perimeters that he simply floated through, completely ignoring their presence as if they were holographic projections. But as he descended deeper into the planet's atmosphere, the Beyonder noticed something peculiar, something he hadn't encountered in any of his previous dimensional excursions. There was an energy here, woven through the very fabric of space-time itself, connecting every living thing in an intricate web of cause and effect. It wasn't technology. It wasn't physics as he understood them. It was something else entirely. The Force, he whispered, tasting the word as it appeared in the minds of the beings around him. How delightfully strange. He reached out with his consciousness, attempting to examine this phenomenon more closely, to understand its nature and perhaps reshape it to see what would happen. His reality-warping power touched the Force. And for the first time in his existence, the Beyonder encountered resistance. Not opposition in the sense of a battle or conflict, but something far more fundamental. The Force didn't fight him. It simply was, existing in a state that predated his arrival and would persist after his departure. When he attempted to manipulate it, to bend it to his will as he had bent the laws of physics in countless other realities, the Force flowed around his influence like water around a stone, returning to its natural state the moment his attention shifted elsewhere. The Beyonder stopped his descent, hovering motionless above the Senate district, his expression shifting to something that might have been surprise if such a being could experience that emotion. "You resist me," he said, and for the first time, there was genuine curiosity in his voice rather than detached observation. Not through power, but through existence itself. How is this possible? In the Imperial Palace, Palpatine smiled, a thin, cruel expression that didn't reach his eyes. Yes, the Emperor whispered to himself, sensing the Beyonder's confusion through the Force. You may reshape matter and energy, creature, but the Force is eternal. It existed before the universe, and it will exist after. You are powerful, but here, in this galaxy, you are not absolute. The Emperor turned to Vader, his smile widening. Bring him to me, Lord Vader. Use whatever means necessary. I wish to speak with our unexpected visitor. Vader's respirator cycled once, a sound that conveyed both acknowledgement and something that might have been apprehension. As you wish, my master. The Dark Lord turned, his cape billowing behind him as he strode toward the hangar bay where his personal shuttle waited. Above the city, the Beyonder remained motionless, his attention fully focused on the strange energy that permeated this universe. The Force whispered around him, through him, and yet somehow remained separate from him, an impossibility that demanded investigation. For a being who had experienced everything existence had to offer, who had grown bored with omnipotence itself, this represented something he had never encountered before, a genuine mystery. Yes, the Beyonder said, his voice carrying across Coruscant like distant thunder. This will be interesting. If you want to see more characters enter the Star Wars galaxy, hit that subscribe button and drop the name of a character you'd want to see in the comments below. May the Force be with you. The dimensional rift above Coruscant sealed itself with a sound like reality sighing in relief, but the Beyonder remained, and with his presence, the galaxy far, far away would never be the same. The Imperial shuttle descended through Coruscant's traffic lanes with the authority of absolute power, other vessels scattering from its path like fish before a predator. Inside the command cabin, Darth Vader stood motionless, his masked face turned toward the viewport where the Beyonder remained suspended above the Senate district. Through the Force, Vader could sense the entity, or rather, he could sense the absence where the entity should be, a void in the cosmic tapestry that his foresight couldn't fully comprehend. My lord, the shuttle pilot ventured carefully, we're approaching the target's coordinates. What are your orders for engagement? Vader's respirator cycled 3 times before he responded, a habit that his subordinates had learned indicated deep calculation. Maintain distance of 500 meters. Do not approach closer without my direct command. He paused, extending his senses toward the floating figure. This is not a battle. This is a negotiation. The Beyonder noticed the shuttle's approach with the same casual interest he might show a particularly colorful insect. He turned in midair, his form rotating without any visible means of propulsion, and regarded the Imperial craft with eyes that seemed to contain infinite depth. For a moment, he simply observed, the angular design, the Imperial insignia, the way the Force swirled around the black-armored figure visible through the viewport. Fascinating, the Beyonder murmured. You're different from the others. Your connection to this Force is powerful, but it's been corrupted. No, that's not quite right. Transformed. Twisted into something darker. He drifted closer to the shuttle, ignoring the sudden tension that rippled through the crew. You've suffered. I can see it in the way reality bends around you. You wear that armor not just as protection but as a prison. Vader's gloved hands clenched into fists. No one spoke to him this way. No one dared to perceive him so clearly, to strip away the mystique of fear and power he had cultivated for decades. You will accompany me to the Imperial Palace, he commanded, his voice carrying the weight of the dark side. The Emperor wishes to speak with you. The Emperor, the Beyonder repeated, tasting the word. Yes, I sensed him earlier. The Old One, consumed by the dark aspect of your Force. His power is considerable by this universe's standards, but he's still bound by its rules, still limited by, he paused, his expression shifting to something resembling amusement. Oh. He wants to use me. How delightfully predictable. The shuttle's boarding ramp extended, and Vader descended with measured steps, his boots clanking against the metal surface until he stood on open air, suspended by the Force above Coruscant's endless cityscape. The wind whipped his cape around him, but his stance remained perfectly stable, a demonstration of power and control. You speak as if you understand our galaxy, creature. But you know nothing of the Force, nothing of the Empire's strength. Don't I? The Beyonder drifted closer, until he and Vader were separated by mere meters. I know that your Force is a fundamental energy field created by all living things. It surrounds you, penetrates you, binds the galaxy together. I know that it has two aspects, light and dark, creation and destruction, selflessness and passion. I know that your Emperor has spent decades consolidating power, eliminating the Jedi Order, and ruling through fear. He tilted his head. I know all of this because the moment I entered this universe, I absorbed the collective knowledge of every mind on this planet. Your history, your conflicts, your philosophies, they're all quite fascinating. Vader's respirator quickened, a sign of rising anger. His hand moved to his lightsaber, the weapon hissing to life in a blade of crimson energy that cast dancing shadows across his mask. If you know so much, then you know what I am capable of. Oh yes, the Beyonder replied, his tone almost pitying. You can manipulate matter and energy through this Force of yours. You can crush windpipes with a thought, deflect energy weapons, sense intentions before they become actions. By the standards of this galaxy, you're quite formidable. He extended one hand, and reality rippled around his fingers like water. But I can do this. The space between them folded. Not through the Force, not through any technology Vader recognized, but through pure manipulation of dimensional coordinates. One moment they were separated by meters, the next, the Beyonder's hand was resting gently on Vader's chest plate, directly over the life support systems that kept the Sith Lord alive. I could reach inside you, the Beyonder continued conversationally, and repair the damage that's kept you imprisoned in this armor for so long. Your lungs, burned beyond recognition. Your limbs, replaced with mechanical substitutes. Your face, scarred by fire and betrayal. I could make you whole again with less effort than you expend breathing. For the first time in years, Darth Vader felt something he had almost forgotten, hope. It flickered in his consciousness like a dying ember, quickly smothered by suspicion and the dark conditioning of decades. Why? He growled. What do you want in exchange? The Beyonder withdrew his hand, and the distance between them returned to its original span as if the intervening moment had been edited out of existence. Want? I don't want anything. I'm here to observe, to learn, to understand this peculiar universe where a mystical energy field governs reality itself. He gestured at the city around them. But I'm beginning to realize that my presence here is problematic. Explain, Vader commanded, his lightsaber still ignited but held in a neutral position. When I arrived, I attempted to examine the Force more closely, to understand its nature. But when I tried to manipulate it, the Beyonder made a grasping motion, and suddenly the air around them erupted with conflicting energies. Reality twisted, matter phased between states, and for a brief moment, Vader could see impossible geometries overlapping with normal space. Then the Force surged, a tidal wave of cosmic energy that swept through the disturbance, restoring natural order with inexorable patience. The Beyonder's expression shifted to one of genuine fascination. It resists. Not through opposing force, but through fundamental existence. The Force is woven into the very structure of this universe at a level that predates physical law. When I attempt to reshape reality here, the Force treats my changes as aberrations and corrects them. He looked at his own hands as if seeing them for the first time. I'm still powerful here, perhaps the most powerful entity in your galaxy, but I'm not absolute. The Force limits me. Vader deactivated his lightsaber, understanding dawning behind his mask. You're diminished. Not diminished, the Beyonder corrected. Constrained. There's a difference. My power remains, but its application here requires finesse. Force-sensitive beings are particularly resistant to my abilities. Objects imbued with the Force don't respond to my manipulation the way normal matter does. And when I try to alter something on a large scale, he gestured at the city below. The Force pushes back, maintaining the natural order. Then you are vulnerable, Vader observed, his tactical mind already calculating possibilities. The Emperor will want to exploit this. Oh, I'm counting on it, the Beyonder replied with what might have been a smile. Your Emperor is arrogant, consumed by his own power, convinced that he can manipulate anyone and anything to serve his purposes. But he's also intelligent, knowledgeable about the Force in ways that few others are. If anyone in this galaxy can help me understand why the Force resists my power, it's him. Vader's respirator cycled in what might have been a dark chuckle. You want to use the Emperor to study the Force. And he wants to use me as a weapon. We both know this. The Beyonder drifted toward the shuttle, gesturing for Vader to lead the way. So let's not waste time with pretense. Take me to your master, Lord Vader. I'm very curious to meet a man who has spent decades studying the dark aspects of a cosmic force he can never fully control. As they boarded the shuttle, Vader cast one last glance at the entity who had just turned an Imperial summons into a mutual agreement. The Dark Lord had served Palpatine for over 2 decades, had witnessed his master's manipulation of senators, Jedi, and entire star systems. But this creature, this Beyonder, seemed completely immune to intimidation, bribery, or threats. The question that troubled Vader as the shuttle lifted off toward the Imperial Palace was simple: what happens when an unstoppable schemer meets an entity that cannot be manipulated? Through the Force, Vader sensed his master's presence growing stronger as they approached the palace, could feel Palpatine's anticipation mixing with calculation. The Emperor believed he could control this situation, could bend even this cosmic entity to his will through cunning and dark side mastery. Vader hoped, for the galaxy's sake, that his master was right. Because if the Emperor failed, if this Beyonder decided that this universe no longer interested him. The Dark Lord didn't finish the thought. The shuttle docked in the Imperial hangar, and the Beyonder stepped out onto Imperial soil with the casual confidence of a god visiting an ant colony. Guards snapped to attention, their weapons trained but not firing. Officers barked orders that went unheeded. And through it all, the entity simply walked forward, following Vader toward the throne room where the galaxy's most dangerous man waited. This should be enlightening, the Beyonder said, and Vader couldn't tell if he was being sarcastic or sincere. The throne room of the imperial palace was a study in calculated intimidation. Every architectural element, the towering columns of polished obsidian, the vast circular chamber stretching 50 meters to a vaulted ceiling, the single throne elevated on a dais that forced supplicants to look upward, had been designed to remind visitors of their insignificance. Shadows pooled in the corners despite the dim illumination from hidden light sources, and the air itself felt heavy with the weight of dark side energy that Palpatine had cultivated over decades of meditation and malevolent focus. None of it impressed the Beyonder in the slightest. He walked through the massive doors without waiting for them to fully open, simply phasing through the gap with casual disregard for physical barriers. His footsteps made no sound on the polished floor as he crossed the chamber, his gaze sweeping across the architecture with the clinical assessment of someone evaluating a primitive structure. Behind him, Vader entered through more conventional means, taking his customary position at the Emperor's right hand. Emperor Palpatine sat upon his throne in his characteristic pose, hunched forward slightly, hooded robes concealing most of his withered features, gnarled hands resting on the armrests. His yellow eyes tracked the Beyonder's approach with predatory intensity, but he made no move to stand or acknowledge his visitor. This was a power play, a demonstration that even cosmic entities would come to him, would be received on his terms. The Beyonder stopped at the base of the dais, looking up at the Emperor with an expression of mild curiosity. For a long moment, neither spoke. The silence stretched, filled only by the rhythmic cycling of Vader's respirator and the distant hum of Coruscant's endless traffic beyond the palace walls. Finally, Palpatine spoke, his voice a rasping whisper that somehow carried perfect clarity through the vast chamber. "Welcome to my empire, stranger. I am Emperor Palpatine, sovereign of the Galactic Empire, master of the dark side of the Force." He leaned forward slightly, his eyes narrowing. "And you are an anomaly, a disruption in the natural order that requires examination." "I am the Beyonder," the entity replied, his tone conversational despite the implied threat in Palpatine's words. "And you, Emperor, are a fascinating specimen of controlled corruption. You've spent decades transforming yourself into a living nexus of dark energy, feeding on fear and suffering to extend your lifespan far beyond natural limits. Quite impressive by local standards." Palpatine's lips curled into something that wasn't quite a smile. "You speak as if you understand the dark side. But knowledge without experience is merely theory, and theory without power is worthless." "Oh, I understand power quite well," the Beyonder said. He gestured casually, and suddenly the entire throne room shifted. The walls became transparent, revealing not the city beyond but a view of deep space, thousands of star destroyers hanging in perfect formation, their weapons charged and ready. "I could give you a fleet 10 times the size of what you currently command. Each ship crewed by beings absolutely loyal to your cause, incapable of betrayal or doubt." Palpatine's eyes widened fractionally, the first genuine reaction he'd shown. Vader's hand moved toward his lightsaber, but a subtle gesture from the Emperor stayed his movement. The Beyonder continued, the phantom fleet vanishing as quickly as it appeared, the walls returning to their original opacity. "Or I could do this." He snapped his fingers, and suddenly Palpatine's withered body began to change. The wrinkles smoothed, the yellowed skin regained color, the hunched posture straightened. For 3 seconds, Emperor Palpatine appeared as he had before his duel with Mace Windu, younger, healthier, unburdened by the physical toll of dark side corruption. Then the Force surged through the throne room like a tidal wave, and the changes reverted. Palpatine's body returned to its withered state as if the transformation had never occurred, the cosmic energy rejecting the alteration with patient insistence. The Beyonder tilted his head, studying the effect with genuine interest. "Fascinating. The Force won't allow permanent changes to beings deeply connected to it. I can reshape normal matter with ease, buildings, technology, ordinary organisms, but you, Emperor, are too intertwined with this universal energy field. Any changes I make to your physical form are temporary at best." Palpatine's expression shifted from shock to calculation in an instant. His mind, honed by decades of political maneuvering and Sith manipulation, immediately grasped the implications. You are not omnipotent here. The Force itself constrains you. Constrains is such a limiting word, the Beyonder replied, drifting upward until he was eye level with the seated Emperor. I prefer to think of it as an interesting challenge. I've reshaped entire universes, created and destroyed realities on a whim, challenged beings you would consider gods. But this force of yours, it's something genuinely new. A universal constant that maintains order through sheer existence rather than opposing force. Then you are diminished, Palpatine said, his voice carrying a hint of satisfaction. Powerful, yes, but not the god you pretend to be. Pretend? The Beyonder's laugh echoed through the chamber, and for a moment, reality itself seemed to laugh with him. The shadows in the corners deepened, the light sources flickered, and every being in the palace simultaneously felt a presence brush against their consciousness, vast, alien, and utterly beyond mortal comprehension. Then the moment passed, and everything returned to normal. I don't pretend, Emperor. I simply am. And while the Force does constrain my abilities when dealing with Force-sensitive matter, that still leaves approximately 99% of your galaxy completely subject to my will. The Beyonder gestured, and suddenly Vader's lightsaber floated from his belt, igniting in midair. The crimson blade spun in a complex pattern, then split into a dozen identical copies, each burning with impossible brilliance. Your technology, your ships, your weapons, all of it is mine to reshape as I see fit. Palpatine watched the display with hooded eyes, his gnarled fingers drumming against the armrest in a rhythm that Vader recognized as his master deep in thought. You claim to be here merely to observe, to study the Force. But beings of power always want something more. What is it you truly seek, Beyonder? The entity dispelled the duplicate lightsabers with a thought, allowing the original to float back to Vader's belt. He drifted back down to the floor, his expression becoming almost contemplative. I seek understanding. In my reality, I was omnipotent, able to reshape existence on a whim, to know all things, to control all outcomes. But omnipotence is boring, Emperor. When you can have or do anything, nothing has meaning. Nothing surprises you. Nothing challenges you. He walked in a slow circle around the base of the dais, his hands clasped behind his back in an oddly human gesture. Then I discovered the multiverse, infinite realities, each with different laws and possibilities. I've traveled to universes of pure energy, dimensions where thought and matter are indistinguishable, realities where time flows backward. And now I've found this place, where a mystical energy field governs the fundamental structure of existence itself, and that energy field resists me. And this fascinates you, Palpatine said, his voice taking on a silky quality that Vader knew meant his master was shifting into manipulation mode. You, a being of near-infinite power, are intrigued by the one force in all existence that limits you. Precisely. The Beyonder stopped pacing, turning to face the Emperor directly. I want to understand the Force completely, not just observe it, but comprehend it at a fundamental level. How does it maintain balance? Why does it have a will? What is the source of its power? These are questions I cannot answer through simple observation or manipulation. Palpatine's lips curled into a genuine smile now, revealing yellowed teeth. And you believe I can help you answer these questions? You're the most knowledgeable Force user currently alive in this galaxy, the Beyonder replied matter-of-factly. You've studied both light and dark aspects, you've plumbed ancient Sith holocrons, you've experimented with the Force's limits in ways the Jedi would never dare. If anyone can explain why the Force resists my power, it's you. In exchange for what? Palpatine asked, his tone making it clear he expected nothing to be freely given. The Beyonder spread his hands. What would you like? I can reshape matter and energy, within the limits the Force imposes. I can grant you knowledge of technologies from other universes. I can extend your lifespan further than even the dark side has managed. I can create armies, weapons, power sources beyond your current understanding. He paused. I can even give you information about the future of this galaxy, about threats you haven't yet discovered and opportunities you haven't yet recognized. Vader felt a disturbance in the Force, his master's excitement mixing with calculation and barely contained greed. Palpatine leaned back in his throne, steepling his fingers in his characteristic gesture of contemplation. You offer much, Beyonder. But I sense a trap. If the Force constrains your power over Force-sensitive beings, then any bargain you offer could be rejected or undone by that same cosmic energy. True, the Beyonder acknowledged. But you're not asking for changes to yourself or other Force users. You're asking for tools, weapons, ships, technology, knowledge. All of which are significantly less resistant to my manipulation. He drifted closer to the throne, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. Besides, Emperor, we both know you're not agreeing to this exchange because you trust me. You're agreeing because you believe you can control the situation, can manipulate me into serving your purposes while appearing to serve mine. Palpatine's expression didn't change, but Vader felt a spike of surprise through their master-apprentice bond. The Beyonder had just openly stated the Emperor's intended strategy, and rather than being insulted or defensive, Palpatine seemed almost pleased. You're remarkably perceptive for an outsider, the Emperor said. Very well. I will teach you about the Force, its history, its nature, its secrets. In exchange, you will provide the Empire with resources, technologies, advantages that will ensure my rule remains unchallenged for millennia to come. Agreed, the Beyonder said immediately. But I have one condition, I want to observe everything. Every experiment, every dark side ritual, every technique you use. Full transparency, Emperor. No secrets, no deceptions. Palpatine's smile widened. No secrets. My dear Beyonder, the Sith are built on secrets. Deception is our foundation, hidden knowledge our currency. Then this will be an interesting challenge for both of us, the Beyonder replied, matching the Emperor's smile with an expression that was simultaneously amused and utterly alien. You'll try to deceive me while appearing transparent. I'll try to learn your secrets while appearing satisfied with surface knowledge. We'll both pretend to trust each other while constantly calculating advantage. For a moment, the two beings, the ancient Sith Lord and the cosmic entity, regarded each other with expressions of mutual understanding and anticipation. Then Palpatine laughed, a sound like cracking ice, and gestured toward a side chamber. Come. I have much to show you, and you have much to learn. Lord Vader, you will accompany us. This knowledge may prove valuable to your own understanding of the Force. As they moved toward the meditation chamber where Palpatine conducted his most private experiments, Vader couldn't shake the feeling that he was witnessing the beginning of something catastrophic. His master believed he could control this situation, could manipulate the Beyonder into becoming a tool of the Empire. But Vader had sensed the entity's true nature when he touched the Force, or rather, when the Force had recoiled from touching him. The Beyonder wasn't interested in power or control. He was interested in understanding, in experiencing the one thing his omnipotence had never provided, genuine limitation. And there was no predicting what such a being might do when he finally understood the Force's secrets. The meditation chamber doors sealed behind them with a hiss of pressurized air, and the real education began. The meditation chamber was a stark contrast to the throne room's theatrical grandeur. Here, in this circular space barely 15 meters in diameter, Palpatine had stripped away all pretense. The walls were bare durasteel inscribed with Sith runes that pulsed with faint crimson light. The floor was marked with concentric circles of ancient symbols, each representing a different aspect of the dark side: pain, anger, fear, hatred, suffering. At the chamber's center stood a pyramidal holocron, its surfaces shifting with shadows that moved independently of any light source. The Beyonder circled the chamber slowly, his fingers trailing along the inscribed walls. Where his skin made contact, the Sith runes flared brighter for a moment before returning to their dormant state. These symbols are more than decorative, he observed. They're anchors, focal points for dark side energy. You've turned this entire chamber into a resonance cavity for malevolent Force power. Palpatine moved to the holocron, his withered hands hovering above its apex without quite touching. The dark side is not inherently malevolent, Beyonder. It is merely honest. The Jedi preach detachment, selflessness, denial of passion. They would have Force users become passive observers of the galaxy's suffering, maintaining a balance that preserves the status quo. His yellow eyes reflected the holocron's crimson glow. The Sith embrace reality. We acknowledge that power, passion, and strength are the true driving forces of existence. The strong rule. The weak serve or perish. This is the natural order. Interesting philosophy, the Beyonder replied, though his tone suggested he found it neither particularly interesting nor particularly unique. But you're avoiding my question, Emperor. I didn't ask about your ideology. I asked about the Force itself, its fundamental nature, its source, why it maintains balance even when beings like you try to tip the scales toward darkness. Vader stood near the chamber's entrance, his massive form a silent sentinel. Through the Force, he could feel the tension building between his master and the cosmic entity, not hostility exactly, but a clash of perspectives between a being who had spent 70 years mastering the dark side and a being who viewed the entire Force as a curiosity to be dissected. Palpatine's fingers finally touched the holocron, and it opened like a blooming flower. Holographic images erupted into the air, ancient Sith Lords, forgotten battles, knowledge preserved for millennia. The Force, the Emperor began, his voice taking on the quality of a lecturer who has explained this countless times, is generated by all living things. Midi-chlorians, microscopic organisms that exist within the cells of all life, create a connection to this energy field. The more midi-chlorians in an organism, the stronger its potential connection to the Force. The Beyonder waved his hand dismissively, and the holocron's images froze mid-display. I already know this. I absorbed that information from every mind on Coruscant the moment I arrived. Midi-chlorians, light side, dark side, the Jedi Code, the Sith Rule of Two, all of it is surface knowledge. What I'm asking about is deeper. Why does the Force have a will? Why does it resist manipulation by external powers like mine? For the first time since their meeting began, Palpatine looked genuinely uncertain. His fingers drummed against the frozen holocron's surface, and when he spoke, his voice carried a note of reluctant admission. That, Beyonder, is a question even the most ancient Sith Lords could not fully answer. The Force simply is. It existed before the first sentient beings evolved, before midi-chlorians facilitated the first conscious connection to its power. Some believe it is the universe itself made manifest. Others claim it is the collective consciousness of all living things across space and time. And what do you believe? The Beyonder pressed. Palpatine's eyes narrowed. I believe the Force is a tool, the most powerful tool in existence, but a tool nonetheless. One that can be bent, shaped, and wielded by those strong enough to master it. He gestured, and the holocron's images resumed their flow. But you've discovered something I have long suspected, the Force maintains itself. When powerful beings attempt to drastically reshape reality through the Force, the universe itself corrects the imbalance. Like an immune system, the Beyonder said, understanding dawning in his voice. The Force treats major disruptions as infections to be healed. That's why my reality manipulation meets resistance. I'm triggering the galaxy's cosmic antibodies. A crude analogy, but essentially accurate. Palpatine released the holocron, and it sealed itself once more. The Force seeks balance, not the static, passive balance the Jedi foolishly pursue, but a dynamic equilibrium between creation and destruction, order and chaos. When one side grows too powerful, the Force itself generates circumstances to restore balance. The Beyonder's expression shifted to something that might have been frustration. Then any significant change I make will be undone over time. The Force will simply correct whatever alterations I introduce. Not necessarily, Palpatine said, his voice taking on a cunning edge. The Force does not instantly reject all changes. It responds to intent and scale. Small, gradual alterations that serve the Force's own drive toward balance are permitted, even encouraged. It's only when beings attempt to fundamentally break the rules that the Force pushes back. Vader spoke for the first time since entering the chamber, his deep voice cutting through the discussion. The Force allowed you to become Emperor, Master. You orchestrated the Clone Wars, manipulated both sides, and turned the Republic into the Empire. The Force did not stop you. Because I worked with the Force, not against it, Palpatine explained. The Jedi had grown complacent, stagnant. Their rigid adherence to their code was creating an imbalance, too much order, too much restriction. By embracing the dark side and allowing passion and power to flourish, I restored balance through destruction and transformation. He turned back to the Beyonder. The Force permitted my rise because I was fulfilling its need for change. But it won't permit me to simply reshape reality on a whim, the Beyonder concluded. Because my power doesn't flow through the Force, it exists independent of it, and that independence threatens the Force's fundamental nature. Precisely. Palpatine moved closer to the entity, his expression calculating. However, if you were to learn to channel your power through the Force rather than around it, if you could make the Force itself the medium for your reality manipulation, he let the implication hang in the air. The Beyonder's eyes, if they could be called eyes, seemed to light up with genuine excitement. Then the Force would treat my changes as natural rather than aberrations. I could reshape reality without triggering the cosmic immune response. He looked at Palpatine with newfound respect. You're suggesting I become Force-sensitive. I'm suggesting you learn to interface with the Force, Palpatine corrected. Whether a being without midichlorians can truly become Force-sensitive is an unknown question. But even without direct Force connection, it may be possible to align your reality manipulation with the Force's natural flow. To make it believe your changes are organic rather than external impositions. Vader felt a disturbance ripple through the Force, a sensation he couldn't quite identify. It was as if the cosmic energy itself was listening to this conversation, aware that these two beings were discussing ways to circumvent its fundamental nature. For a brief moment, the Dark Lord had the distinct impression that the Force was concerned. The Beyonder began pacing again, his mind clearly racing through possibilities. Show me, he demanded. Demonstrate how you manipulate the Force. I want to see the energy flow, understand the technique, observe how consciousness interfaces with this field. Palpatine smiled, the expression of a teacher who has finally hooked a particularly challenging student. Very well. Lord Vader, step forward. Vader obeyed, moving to the center of the chamber. He knew what was coming. His master had demonstrated this particular technique countless times, always to prove a point about power and domination. The Force can be used to influence the weak-minded, Palpatine said, raising one gnarled hand toward Vader. To cloud judgment, alter perception, even control actions. Observe. Dark side energy gathered around the Emperor, visible to Force-sensitive eyes as a swirling vortex of shadow. It reached across the chamber toward Vader, attempting to slip past his mental defenses, to cloud his thoughts and bend his will. But Vader was no weak-minded fool. His own dark side power rose to meet his master's probe, deflecting it through practiced resistance. The Beyonder watched with absolute focus, his perception extending beyond normal sight to observe phenomena invisible to ordinary beings. He could see the energy exchange, could perceive the way consciousness shaped the Force into specific patterns, could sense how intention and emotion drove the power's manifestation. Fascinating, he breathed. It's not just willpower. There's an emotional component, anger, passion, desire. The dark side responds to intensity of feeling, uses emotion as fuel for physical manipulation. He turned to Palpatine. But the Jedi use the opposite approach, don't they? Calm, detachment, serenity. Two completely different methodologies accessing the same fundamental energy. The Force is the same, Palpatine confirmed, releasing his dark side probe. But the path to power differs dramatically. The Jedi limit themselves through detachment, never fully embracing their potential. The Sith achieve true power by accepting all emotions, all passions, all desires. He moved closer to the Beyonder, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. Tell me, entity, when you manipulate reality in your own universe, what drives your power? Emotion? Will? Something else entirely? The Beyonder considered the question carefully. Intent, he finally answered. Pure intention without the filter of emotion or limitation. I desire something, and reality conforms to that desire. There's no struggle, no resistance, no cost. I simply am, and therefore I can. Then perhaps that's your problem here, Palpatine suggested. The Force requires more than pure intention. It requires engagement, emotional, spiritual, philosophical. You must convince the Force that your desires align with its nature, that your changes serve the greater balance even if they appear disruptive in the moment. The Beyonder's form flickered, becoming translucent for a moment as if he was considering this at a fundamental level. You're suggesting I learn to lie to the universe itself. I'm suggesting you learn to speak its language, Palpatine corrected. Every being that successfully wields the Force does so by convincing the cosmic energy that their actions are justified, necessary, aligned with some greater purpose. The Jedi claim service to the light. The Sith embrace passion and power. Both are simply different dialects of the same fundamental conversation with the Force. For a long moment, silence filled the meditation chamber. Vader could feel his master's satisfaction through their bond. Palpatine believed he was successfully manipulating the Beyonder, convincing him to pursue a path that would ultimately serve Imperial interests. But Vader could also sense something else. The Beyonder's genuine intellectual engagement with these concepts, his authentic curiosity about understanding rather than simply exploiting this knowledge. Very well, the Beyonder said finally. Teach me to speak the Force's language. Show me how to align my power with this universe's fundamental nature. In exchange, he gestured, and suddenly the air filled with holographic schematics, weapons designs, ship configurations, energy systems that made even Vader's cybernetic eyes widen with recognition of their devastating potential. In exchange, the Beyonder continued, I give you this, technology from 17 different universes I've visited, adapted to function with your galaxy's physics. Weapons that can crack planets. Ships that can cross the galaxy in hours. Power sources that will make your Death Star look like a child's toy. Palpatine's eyes gleamed with barely suppressed hunger as he studied the displays. His fingers reached toward the nearest schematic, and when he touched it, the hologram expanded to show intricate details of a weapon system that could theoretically destabilize a star's core. Yes, the Emperor whispered, his voice thick with dark satisfaction. Yes, this will do nicely. With these technologies, the Empire will be truly eternal. No rebellion will ever threaten my rule. No force in the galaxy will dare oppose me. The Beyonder watched the Emperor's reaction with clinical detachment, and in that moment, Vader realized something that sent a chill through his cybernetic spine. The entity wasn't being manipulated at all. He was conducting an experiment, observing how beings of power responded to the promise of even greater power. The technology was real, the offer genuine, but it was also bait, a way to study how the dark side corrupted judgment and inflamed ambition. And his master, for all his cunning and wisdom, had taken the bait eagerly. We begin immediately, Palpatine declared, finally tearing his attention away from the schematics. Lord Vader will assist in the initial experiments. We'll start with basic Force techniques and gradually increase complexity. By the time we're finished, Beyonder, you'll understand the Force as intimately as any Sith Lord. And you'll have the means to make your empire truly unstoppable, the Beyonder added with what might have been irony or might have been sincerity. Vader genuinely couldn't tell. As the three beings prepared to begin the first experiment, Vader extended his senses through the Force one more time. What he felt made his breathing pause for a full cycle. The cosmic energy was gathering, concentrating around the Imperial Palace like storm clouds forming before lightning strikes. The Force itself was watching this collaboration with something that felt disturbingly like apprehension. And when the Force grew apprehensive, entire civilizations had been known to fall. 3 weeks had passed since the Beyonders' arrival, and the Imperial Palace had become a laboratory for cosmic experimentation. Palpatine had commandeered an entire wing of the complex, converting meditation chambers, training rooms, and even a former Jedi archive into spaces dedicated to studying the intersection between the Beyonders' reality manipulation and the Force's universal laws. Stormtroopers now patrolled corridors filled with impossible geometries, hallways that bent at angles that shouldn't exist, rooms where gravity operated sideways, chambers where time flowed at different rates than the universe outside. In the largest of these converted spaces, the Beyonder floated cross-legged in mid-air, his form flickering between solid and translucent as he attempted his first genuine Force meditation. Around him, Palpatine had arranged a circle of ancient Sith artifacts, holocrons, amulets, weapons imbued with dark side energy over millennia. Each item pulsed with malevolent power, their combined resonance creating a nexus of dark energy that would have overwhelmed a lesser Force user. The Beyonder remained completely unaffected. "You're still approaching this incorrectly," Palpatine observed from his position outside the circle. The Emperor looked haggard. 3 weeks of constant instruction and experimentation had taken a visible toll even on his dark side sustained vitality. "You're trying to impose your will on the Force. That's not meditation, that's domination. Even the dark side requires subtlety." "Subtlety," the Beyonder repeated, his voice echoing from multiple points in space simultaneously. "A concept I've never needed to master. In every other universe, reality simply conforms to my desires. Here, I must convince it to cooperate." His eyes opened, blazing with frustration. It's like trying to communicate with a deaf entity that somehow still understands everyone else perfectly. Vader stood near the chamber's entrance, monitoring sensor equipment that tracked the energy fluctuations from the Beyonders' attempts. The readings were disturbing. Each time the entity tried to connect with the Force, the cosmic energy would briefly touch his consciousness before recoiling, as if burned. The Force wasn't rejecting him out of hostility, it simply couldn't integrate with something so fundamentally alien to its nature. "Perhaps the issue is one of compatibility," Vader suggested, his vocoder cutting through the ambient energy hum. "Midi-chlorians facilitate Force connection in organic beings. You have no midi-chlorians, no biological substrate for the Force to interface with. You are asking the impossible." "Nothing is impossible," the Beyonder snapped, his frustration manifesting as a ripple in reality. The walls of the chamber briefly became transparent, revealing the infinite void between dimensions. Then the Force surged, and solidity returned. "I've reshaped entire universes. I've created and destroyed realities. I've challenged entities you would worship as gods. I will not be defeated by an energy field that primitive beings can manipulate with focused breathing." Palpatine's lips curved into a thin smile. "Pride. Excellent. That emotion I can work with." He moved closer to the circle, careful not to cross the boundary. "Channel that frustration, Beyonder. Feed it into your next attempt. The dark side thrives on passion, anger, hatred, desire. If pure intention doesn't work, try intention fueled by genuine emotion." The Beyonder's form solidified completely, his expression shifting to something more focused. "Emotion as a catalyst. Interesting." He closed his eyes again, and this time, Vader could sense something different in the entity's approach. Where before there had been cold, clinical intent, now there was heat, genuine frustration mixed with determination and, surprisingly, a hint of fear. Fear of failure. Fear of limitation. Fear that perhaps there truly was something in existence that he could not master. The dark side responded immediately. Vader felt it through the Force, a tendril of dark energy reaching up from the artifacts, drawn by the Beyonder's emotional state. It touched the entity's consciousness, and for a brief moment, the two powers merged. Reality and Force aligned, and the impossible happened. The Beyonder's reality manipulation flowed through the dark side rather than around it. The effect was instantaneous and catastrophic. Every Sith artifact in the circle shattered simultaneously, there contained dark side energy released in an expanding wave of pure malevolence. The chamber's walls cracked, durasteel screaming as molecular bonds were stressed beyond tolerance. Outside the palace, across Coruscant cityscape, every Force-sensitive being within 100 kilometers suddenly felt a spike of wrongness, as if reality itself had briefly convulsed in pain. The Beyonder's eyes snapped open, glowing with an inner light that was neither the crimson of the dark side nor any color that should exist in normal space. "I felt it," he whispered, his voice carrying harmonics that made the air vibrate. For just a moment, the Force acknowledged me. It allowed my power to flow through its structure rather than fighting against it. Palpatine had been thrown back by the explosion of dark side energy, but he pulled himself upright with visible effort, his robes singed and his breathing labored. Despite his condition, triumph shone in his yellow eyes. Yes. That is the key, emotion bridges the gap between your nature and the Force's nature. The artifacts were merely channels, but your passion was the actual connection point. Vader moved to his master's side, offering support that Palpatine irritably waved away. "Master, the energy release was detected across the entire city. We're receiving reports of panic, disruptions in traffic control, even some sensitive individuals collapsing from the psychic shock." "Irrelevant," Palpatine dismissed. "We've achieved a breakthrough. The Beyonder can interface with the Force if he channels his power through emotional engagement." He turned back to the entity, his expression calculating. "But we'll need to be more careful with future experiments. That release was uncontrolled, raw. You need to learn finesse, precision." "No," the Beyonder interrupted, drifting down from his meditation position until his feet touched the floor. "You misunderstand what just happened, Emperor. I didn't achieve control. I achieved contact. And in that moment of contact, I learned something crucial about the Force's nature." He walked through the shattered remains of the Sith artifacts, his passage causing the broken pieces to orbit around him like satellites around a planet. "The Force isn't resisting me because I'm powerful. It's resisting me because I'm empty. Every other being in this universe, Jedi, Sith, even ordinary people, they're part of an interconnected web of life and consciousness. The Force flows through them because they're already part of it, nodes in a vast network." The Beyonder stopped pacing, his form becoming translucent again as he considered the implications. "But I'm not part of that network. I exist outside it, separate from it. When I try to manipulate Force-connected matter, the network treats me as a foreign object, something to be isolated and expelled. The only way I can truly interface with the Force is to become part of the network myself." Vader felt a disturbance ripple through the Force. The cosmic energy was paying close attention to this revelation, and what the Dark Lord sensed from it wasn't concern but something far more primal, self-preservation instinct. The Force recognized that the Beyonder was discovering a fundamental truth about its nature, and that knowledge could be dangerous. Palpatine's expression shifted from triumph to calculation. To become part of the network, you would need to fundamentally alter your nature. You would need to surrender your independence, your separateness. You would need to accept limitation. "Yes," the Beyonder agreed softly. "And that terrifies me more than anything I've encountered in any universe." The admission hung in the air like a physical presence. For the first time since his arrival, the Beyonder had revealed genuine vulnerability, not weakness, but an acknowledgement that this quest to understand the Force might require him to sacrifice the very thing that defined his existence, his absolute autonomy. Vader spoke carefully, sensing an opportunity. "Perhaps there is another approach. If you cannot join the network, perhaps you could observe it more closely. Experience it through another's perspective." The Beyonder turned toward the Dark Lord, interest flickering across his alien features. "You're suggesting a merger. I enter the consciousness of a Force-sensitive being and experience the Force through their neural structure." "A dangerous proposition," Palpatine interjected quickly. "Force bonding with an entity of your power could destroy the host's mind. Even Lord Vader, powerful as he is, might not survive such an integration." "I volunteer," Vader said immediately, and felt his master's surprise spike through their bond. Palpatine's eyes narrowed dangerously. "Lord Vader, I did not give you permission to. With respect, Master, this may be our only path forward. Vader turned to face Palpatine directly, his posture rigid with determination. The Beyonder needs to experience the Force from within. I am strong enough to maintain my identity during such a merger. And if he can learn to interface with the Force through my consciousness, we can continue the research without risking another uncontrolled energy release. The truth, which Vader did not speak aloud, was more complex. Over the past 3 weeks, he had watched his master grow increasingly obsessed with the technologies the Beyonder had provided, increasingly reckless in his experiments. Palpatine was losing sight of the danger this entity represented, blinded by visions of unlimited power and eternal rule. Someone needed to maintain perspective, and if that meant experiencing the Beyonder's consciousness directly, Vader would accept that burden. Besides, there was another motive, one Vader barely acknowledged even to himself. The Beyonder had offered to repair his damaged body, to restore what Mustafar had destroyed. If Vader allowed the entity into his mind, if they achieved true connection, perhaps that offer could be reconsidered. Perhaps he could finally be free of the armor that imprisoned him. The Beyonder studied Vader with an intensity that felt like being dissected by light itself. You have ulterior motives, Lord Vader. I can sense them even without reading your thoughts directly. You want something from me beyond mere scientific collaboration. Everyone wants something, Vader replied evenly. The Emperor wants your technology. You want understanding of the Force. I want, he paused, the words difficult even after so many years. I want to know if there's any part of me that isn't machine. If the man I was still exists somewhere beneath this armor. Silence filled the chamber. Even Palpatine seemed taken aback by Vader's raw honesty, his yellow eyes studying his apprentice with renewed calculation. Finally, the Beyonder nodded. Very well. I accept your offer, Lord Vader. But understand, if I enter your consciousness, I will see everything. Every memory, every regret, every secret you've hidden even from yourself. The merger will be complete and absolute, if only for a moment. Are you prepared for that level of exposure? Vader's respirator cycled 3 times before he answered. I am. Then let us begin, the Beyonder said, moving to stand directly before the Dark Lord. Emperor, you should observe from a safe distance. If this goes wrong, the feedback could damage anyone too close to the connection point. Palpatine retreated to the chamber's edge, his expression a mixture of concern and barely contained excitement. If either of you shows signs of distress, I will sever the connection immediately. Lord Vader is too valuable to lose to a failed experiment. The Beyonder placed one hand on Vader's chest plate, directly over the life support systems. His other hand rose to touch the Dark Lord's mask, fingertips resting where flesh met metal. Ready? Vader's hand tightened into a fist, then relaxed. Proceed. The Beyonder's form began to dissolve, becoming translucent, then completely transparent. His consciousness, vast, alien, impossibly complex, flowed through Vader's armor, through the cybernetic systems, through the damaged organic tissue, and finally into the Dark Lord's mind itself. For Vader, it was like being struck by lightning that lasted forever. Every neuron fired simultaneously. Every memory surfaced at once. Every emotion he had suppressed through decades of dark side discipline erupted in a chaotic cascade. He felt the Beyonder's presence expand through his consciousness like water filling every crack and crevice, touching thoughts and experiences he had locked away, examining the architecture of his mind with clinical precision. And through it all, for the first time in his existence, the Beyonder felt the Force. Not from outside, not as an external phenomenon to be studied, but from within, as a living, breathing part of existence itself. He felt the dark side flowing through Vader's damaged body, sustaining systems that should have failed decades ago. He felt the light side too, buried deep beneath layers of anger and self-hatred, a tiny ember of the man Anakin Skywalker had once been. Most importantly, he felt the connection, the invisible threads that linked Vader to every other living being in the galaxy, the network that made the Force possible. It was beautiful, terrible, and utterly humbling. Then, as suddenly as it began, the merger ended. The Beyonder's form reconstituted outside Vader's body, and the Dark Lord collapsed to one knee, his respirator cycling rapidly as his systems recovered from the unprecedented intrusion. The Beyonder stood motionless, his eyes wide with something that might have been wonder or horror. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a weight it had never held before. "I understand now," he whispered. "The Force isn't just energy. It's not just power. It's life itself, in all its complexity and contradiction. To truly master it, I would have to become alive in a way I've never been. I would have to accept mortality, limitation, connection." He looked at his hands as if seeing them for the first time. "I would have to become less than I am in order to become part of something greater." Palpatine moved forward eagerly. "But you can do it. You can learn to interface with the Force now that you've experienced it from within." The Beyonder's expression was unreadable. "Yes. But the question is no longer whether I can, Emperor. The question is whether I should." The Imperial Security Bureau's monitoring station detected the anomaly 3 hours after the merger between Vader and the Beyonder. It began as a localized disturbance in the Force, nothing unusual for Coruscant, where billions of lives created constant background noise in the cosmic energy field. But this disturbance was different. It grew exponentially, spreading from the Imperial Palace outward in concentric rings that affected every Force-sensitive being they touched. In the Jedi Temple ruins, still standing as a monument to Palpatine's victory over the Old Order, a dozen individuals who had survived Order 66 by suppressing their connection to the Force suddenly gasped in unison. For the first time in decades, they felt the light side surge through their consciousness, clear, powerful, undeniable. The Empire's careful suppression of Force-sensitive individuals across the galaxy was failing, and they didn't understand why. On 36 worlds, infants born with high midichlorian counts that would normally remain dormant until adolescence suddenly exhibited telekinetic abilities. Objects floated in nurseries. Emotions projected telepathically. The Force was awakening in thousands of beings simultaneously, and the phenomenon was accelerating. In the Imperial Palace meditation chamber, the Beyonder stood at the epicenter of the disturbance, his form flickering between states of matter as he processed what he had learned from his merger with Vader. The Dark Lord knelt nearby, still recovering from the intensity of having his consciousness merged with a near-omnipotent entity. Palpatine paced in agitated circles, his withered hands gesturing as he tried to make sense of the sensor readings pouring in from across the planet. "Explain this," the Emperor demanded, thrusting a datapad toward the Beyonder. "Force-sensitive individuals across Coruscant are experiencing spontaneous power increases. Suppressed abilities are manifesting. The entire Force network is becoming more active, more interconnected." "What did you do?" The Beyonder took the datapad, studied it for a moment, then handed it back. "I touched the network. When I merged with Lord Vader's consciousness, I didn't just observe the Force, I briefly became part of it. And in that moment of connection, the Force itself changed. It adapted to accommodate my presence, expanded its parameters to include something that had never existed within its structure before." "You contaminated it," Vader rasped, his vocoder carrying an edge of accusation. "The Force is reacting to your intrusion the way a body reacts to infection, by increasing sensitivity, heightening awareness, trying to identify and respond to the foreign element." "Not contamination," the Beyonder corrected, his tone thoughtful rather than defensive. "Evolution. The Force is a living system in its own way. Not sentient exactly, but responsive, adaptive. When I entered the network through your consciousness, I introduced new patterns, new possibilities. The Force is incorporating those patterns, learning from them, expanding to accommodate what I represent." Palpatine's expression shifted from anger to intense calculation. "You're saying the Force itself is becoming more powerful? That your presence is permanently altering its fundamental nature?" "In subtle ways, yes." The Beyonder gestured, and holographic representations of the Force network appeared in the air, intricate webs of light connecting billions of consciousness nodes across the galaxy. Before my arrival, the Force operated within fixed parameters. Light and dark, creation and destruction, order and chaos, all balanced through predictable patterns. But I represent something the Force has never encountered, external omnipotence attempting to integrate with universal structure. The holographic network pulsed, and new connections began forming, threads of energy linking nodes that had never been connected before. The Force is adapting to my presence by becoming more complex, more interconnected. Individuals with latent Force sensitivity are finding their abilities awakening because the network is strengthening, becoming more efficient at facilitating connection. In essence, I'm making the Force itself more powerful. Vader struggled to his feet, his breathing labored. This is dangerous. If the Force is strengthening across the galaxy, that means not just the Empire's enemies will benefit, it means every Force-sensitive individual, from hidden Jedi survivors to potential Sith rivals, will experience increased power. A problem, Palpatine acknowledged, though his tone suggested he viewed it more as an interesting challenge than a genuine threat. But also an opportunity. If the Force is truly evolving in response to the Beyonder's presence, then we must ensure that evolution serves our purposes. He turned to the entity, his yellow eyes gleaming with dark purpose. You said you understand the Force now, that you know what would be required to truly integrate with it. What exactly would that integration accomplish? The Beyonder dismissed the holographic network with a wave. If I fully integrated, if I surrendered my autonomy and became a true part of the Force network, I would cease to be what I am. The Beyonder would effectively die, and something new would be born, a Force entity of unprecedented power, bound by the same rules as every other Force user but wielding capabilities that no Jedi or Sith has ever possessed. A Force god, Vader said quietly. Not a god. Gods are worshipped. I would simply be part of the system, the way a neuron is part of a brain. Individually powerful but ultimately subordinate to the whole. The Beyonder's expression became distant, as if he was looking at possibilities beyond normal perception. But that integration would have consequences. The Force doesn't just accept new elements passively. It incorporates them, spreads them throughout the network. If I became part of the Force, every Force-sensitive being in the galaxy would gain a fraction of my capabilities. Reality manipulation would become a learnable skill. The boundaries between possible and impossible would blur. Palpatine went very still, his mind clearly racing through implications. You would transform the Force itself. Make every Force user in the galaxy exponentially more powerful. Yes. Including you, Emperor. Including Lord Vader. Including every hidden Jedi, every potential Sith, every Force-sensitive child yet to be born. The Beyonder turned to face them both directly. And I'm seriously considering doing it. The declaration hung in the air like a grenade with the pin pulled. Vader felt the Force itself seem to hold its breath, as if the cosmic energy was aware that a decision of galaxy-altering importance was being contemplated. No, Palpatine said flatly. Absolutely not. I forbid it. The Beyonder's laugh echoed through the chamber, carrying undertones that made reality itself seem to vibrate. You forbid me? Emperor, I've been humoring your belief that you have any authority over my actions. You've provided valuable information about the Force, and I've reciprocated with technology and knowledge. But don't mistake our transaction for subordination. I'm not your tool, your weapon, or your subject. Palpatine's withered face contorted with rage, and dark side energy erupted from his hands, blue-white Force lightning that had killed Jedi Masters and reduced enemies to ash. The attack crossed the chamber in an instant, striking the Beyonder full in the chest. The lightning stopped, held motionless in a crackling sphere around the entity's form. The Beyonder examined the dark side energy with clinical interest, then reached out and grasped it like a physical object. The Force lightning twisted in his grip, changing from blue-white to colors that didn't exist in normal space, then dispersed harmlessly into the surrounding air. That was unwise, Emperor, the Beyonder said, his voice carrying a hard edge that hadn't been present before. I've been patient with your attempts at manipulation because they amused me. But understand this, I am not bound by your authority, your force powers, or your threats. I remain here because I choose to, because this galaxy interests me. The moment that interest fades, I can unmake your empire with less effort than you expend breathing." Vader's hand moved to his lightsaber, but he didn't ignite it. His loyalty to Palpatine was absolute, hardwired through decades of conditioning and dark side bonding. But he was also pragmatic enough to recognize that any conflict with the Beyonder would end in catastrophic defeat. The entity had just casually negated his master's most devastating attack without apparent effort. Palpatine seemed to reach the same conclusion.